What is bottom-up approach? Is it an economic model? Is it a viable one? Can we trust the DP to deliver it? Should we have a better one? These are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we debate the 2022 elections, as we try and see if we can change from a tribal narrative into an economic and issue-based narrative that focuses on us and the money in our pockets. So welcome to my channel. My name is Nahashon Kimemia. Please subscribe, hit the notification button, like this video, share, and comment below. Karibu. Deputy President William Ruto says that the bottom-up approach is a refocus of our economy from the top guys in the economy or the top players to the jobless youth in our country, to the struggling hustler enterprises, and to the people who cannot afford food on their table. Other people have argued that the bottom-up approach is a socialist model, a way of bringing class warfare into Kenya, a way of pitting the haves versus the have-nots. For example, Alfred Mutua said that the bottom-up approach was tried in Tanzania and it did not work. For those who can remember Ujamaa, where people would be taken into collective units from the rural areas, and they would produce certain crops determined by the government, and then the crops would be sold or distributed as per the dictates of the government. That system failed, but according to Alfred Mutua, it was a bottom-up approach because it focused on the people at the very bottom and use of government resources to help those people at the bottom. Other leaders have likened the bottom-up approach to the hustler narrative, and they have said that it's a hustler versus dynasty narrative, where we're trying to pit the haves versus the have-nots. Is that true? I don't know. But what I do know is that that debate, that class war debate, was devastating. Through it, Vladimir Lenin was able to use class warfare in Russia very effectively. Remember, he did not come from a dynasty in Russia. Neither did he come from a poor family. He just came from somewhere in between. But he was able to whip up emotions against those at the top. And he used that to bring forth the Bolshevik Revolution. And during the first stages of the Bolshevik Revolution, there was the Red Terror, where they took over power and they hammered down on political dissent. Around 100,000 to 200,000 people died from that Red Terror, and it only lasted for a while. Yet Lenin was the ruler of Russia for a long time, with people dying all the time and disappearing. Is that what the DP is trying to bring into Kenya? Is it trying to bring conflict, a class conflict, when we are barely able to survive a class tribal conflict? Remember, in 2007, many people died and thousands were displaced. Are we moving from that kind of conflict into a class kind of conflict? Can we survive it? It is critical to study class warfare, to study socialism, to study if this is the intention of the hustler nation, to bring this kind of political turmoil into the country, all for the love of power. Is that what they're trying to do? We cannot know unless we study socialism. So let's do that. Socialism is a populist economic, and political system that's based on public ownership, also known as collective or common ownership of the means of production. Those means include machinery, tools, and factories used to produce goods that aim to directly satisfy human needs. I haven't heard the DP talking about public ownership of the means of production. I haven't heard him talk about owning borders collectively or starting factories collectively. So I believe that to that extent, the people saying that he's trying to bring socialism in Kenya are wrong. To the extent that the DP says that what we've been having in Kenya is a top-down approach, let's look at this definition. We have tried factories to manufacture products in Kenya, public ones. We have tried communal ownership of the means of production, and we did that from independence. Has it worked? For example, the Meat Commission started in 1950, before independence, and the idea was to uplift our livestock industry. We are in 2021. How is the Meat Commission doing? How are the pastoralists in northeastern, in the Maasai areas of Kenya, in Turkana, the Karamajongs, how are they doing? Has this Kenya Meat Commission established in 1950 helped them? Has this collective means of production and distribution of meat through the government helped them? And this is socialism. And this is what we have done from 1950, even before independence. Is that what the DP is trying to bring in Kenya? I don't think so. Deputy President William Ruto says that he's focusing on individual enterprises. Kazi ni kazi. Hustler at the bottom. That means that his focus is not on collective ownership of property. So it's not about socialism. It's not about the Bolshevik revolution, where you take the bottom and say, we are going to own these means of production. We're going to take them from the capitalist and it's going to be ours. That is not what he's saying. He's saying that he will bring government resources to the bottom, that he will give them the resources they need to carry out their individual work, their individual hustles, and to gain their individual profits, to uplift their individual lives. So to the extent that that is what they're saying, that the DP is trying to do, his detractors, they are wrong. They are disingenuous. And we must call them out. However, at the same time, we must study if the DP is trying to bring or to enhance capitalism in Kenya. Because the other side of the coin, when it comes to economics of socialism, is capitalism. And we need to study it as well. Is that what he's trying to bring here? Let's look at it. Capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or businesses own capital goods. The production of goods and services is based on supply and demand in the general market, known as market economy, rather than through central planning, known as a planned economy or command economy. Deputy President William Ruto says that he wants to take 30 billion Kenya shillings, and then he wants to divide them amongst all our constituencies. We have around 290 constituencies. So that would translate into a little over 100 million Kenya shillings per constituency. And he wants businesses to profit or to benefit from these funds through loans that they can pay back, and it can become a revolving kind of fund. And that is his method the most advocated method of helping people from the bottom up. Remember, MPs are close to the people at the bottom, right? They know all the wards, all the MCAs, they know all the issues that are happening there. So it's a way of trying to get closest to the people at the bottom. You should also remember that the National Assembly is the house that decides how we distribute and use our money in Kenya. In most cases, the Senate can play a role, but the National Assembly is the money house. So that's his idea of the bottom-up approach. And I wanted to ask, given our definition of capitalism, don't we have banks? Don't we have microfinance institutions already? If he was trying to bring capitalism into Kenya, what he would do was that he would let the market work. He would not use the government, and then the government would become a loaning agency, which private enterprises already do. The market would not determine the price of the loans, but the government would determine in itself. And it might end up pushing the private sector away from the people. And it might create a dependency on government loans, cheap government loans, which are not really reflective of what is happening in the economy and what the actual risks are in terms of loaning to people at the bottom or just loaning to people in Kenya. So he's not really pushing for capitalism in Kenya. At the same time, he's not really pushing for socialism in Kenya. So what is he pushing for? To understand that, we must dig deeper into socialism and capitalism so that we can understand. And then we can argue from a point of view. Don't you want to understand? Let's try and understand how. In a purely socialist system, all legal and distribution decisions are made by the government, and individuals rely on the state for everything, from food to healthcare. The government determines the output and the pricing levels of these goods and services. Is that what we have in Kenya? For example, we have already shown that the Kenya Meat Commission in Kenya started in 1950, and up to date in 2021 it is not successful. In fact, the government is pumping money into it. In 2016, the government pumped 650 million into the Kenya Meat Commission. Did it help? If it helped, then why did we give the Kenya Meat Commission to the military? So we've had collective ownership of the means of production through the government for certain sectors, and it has never helped to date. So now let's go to the other side, right? We have private insurance companies in Kenya. When we lack adequate insurance cover, what do we say? Do we say that the government should create conditions for private insurance to flourish, or do we say that the government should provide insurance itself? And who pays for that insurance? NHIF started in 1966, and up to this day, people are still lack adequate insurance cover. So what has NHIF been doing from then until today, 2021? And we are still trying to expand it. We're still giving it more money despite all the scandals that have come from it. So are we moving towards a more socialist system, or are we moving towards a more capitalist system? Are we encouraging private enterprises, or are we encouraging the government to answer all our problems? Are we encouraging serikali nisaidie? Why do we believe that the government is the answer to our solutions? If a private enterprise can do X, then why do we bring in the government to do that same thing instead of allowing the private sector to flourish, or allowing more players to come into the industry, or reducing the barriers of entry, so that we have more people perhaps who are more creative, who can come in and beat the guys who are there, who are perhaps exploiting the people? Why is the government getting into an industry our main way of solving our issues? Economic theory that supports the government getting involved in everything and spending as much as it can is what we call demand side economics. Now, in demand side economics, the theory is that when you increase spending in the economy, then people benefit because that leads into money into their pockets, and they use that to expand their businesses, and they use that to buy other products and services, which gives more money to other people. So that's the idea of demand side economics, where you throw money at it and then that money will lead into ripple effects, and it justifies government deficits, right, such that you can operate at that deficit. But the good thing is that you're helping the economy grow. So governments keep on accumulating deficits using the idea that they're helping the economy grow, that they're spending within the economy, and without that spending, people will not have money in their pockets. So that demand side economics is the basic is how we've been running things in Kenya, right? The government has been spending on everything. Whenever we have a problem, we push through an economic stimulus package, and we try to give money to everything. We try to have our Nyayo buses, we try to have our Nyayo milk, we try to give loans to the youth, loans to women, and all those kinds of things, just throwing money at it. Make sure that you're spending so that the people can have money at their pockets. And the question is, has it worked? How many years since independence have we tried that method, and has it worked? Today, as you're in Kenya, do you feel that it has worked? You see, the theory sounds good, but the effect might be different. Let us contrast demand side economics with supply side economics. Now, in demand side economics, we have seen that the government is the solution to our problems, and it solves our problems by throwing money at it. If we don't have enough insurance, or the insurance covers, or the insurance is too expensive, then we throw more money at NHIF, and then that solves the problem. If our dairy sector or our livestock sector is down, then what we do, we start KCC, Kenya Cooperative Creameries, or we start KMC, and then that will solve our problems. And we just throw as much money as possible. And these days we bring in the military. Yes, we bring in the military. So now let's go to supply side economics. So what does supply side economics say? It says that the government is not the solution to our problems, that we actually need the government to move as far away from the people as possible, that the goal of government is only as a referee, to make things fair for us, to make things just, to create that environment where businesses can solve our problems, right? And its only intervention is to make things fairer, to make businesses flourish more, to make those solution providers be able to enter the market more quickly and more cheaply, so that they can deal with those who are trying to exploit the others. That is supply side economics. And how do we achieve that? We achieve that through tax cuts. And when you cut taxes, what happens? Businesses especially have more money in their pockets to spend on other items, to invest, and hopefully invest in research and development, which now creates additional solutions for us. If we limit government regulation, then people can get into the business more quickly. So if there's somebody exploiting us, then another person can come in more quickly. So that is supply side economics, and that's how it works. Now we have an example of supply side economics, and we can see if it works well or how it worked. So let's talk about that for a minute. The hustler nation has decried trickle-down economics, and it has said that it does not work, and we have been using that from the start, and it needs to stop. I've also shown what we've been doing from the start, and it seems more like socialism, right? And in my opinion, trickle down is the same as socialism, because the people at the top, they decide what happens at the bottom, and they push their policies down on us, as opposed to us giving them policies that we want implemented and then them implementing the policies. What they do is that they sit down and develop ideas for tenders, and then they bring them as solutions, and we end up with white elephants. So anyway, back to trickle-down economics. And the example that's mostly used is the one of Ronald Reagan. And I wanted to focus on this a bit, because it would give us an idea of what it is, or of what we think it is. So what did Ronald Reagan do in his time? What he did is that he cut taxes. He believed in supply-side economics, cutting taxes, reducing inflation, and reducing the size of government. And that was his primary focus. That is how he believed he would improve the economy. But he was demonized. That Ronald Reagan cut taxes for the rich and hoped that those benefits would trickle down to the poor. And in truth, he did cut taxes for the rich, because at that time the top personal income tax rate was at 70%, and he slashed that to 50%. That's 20 percentage points, and that's a big deal. For me, I'd be happy, because even if I was a billionaire or millionaire, I wouldn't believe or wouldn't want to pay 70% of my income to the government. So I think that was good for him. And then he did another one, because that was in 1981. He did another one in 1986. He cut the personal income tax rate from 50% to 38.5%. So that was something else, because now, personally, I still wouldn't want to pay 50% of my income to the government. And he prevented that for the Americans, because for the top rich Americans, he gave them 38.5% as their tax rate, which I believe was not bad. I believe it was good. What do you pay if you're a top income earner? I am not. But what do you pay if you're a top income earner in Kenya? Do you pay 30%? Can you imagine paying 50% of that income to the government? Like, look at all your expenses right now. The money you have to send home, the tokens that you have to buy, the gas that you have to buy. For some people, the slave queens that you have to maintain. Can you imagine the government taking 50% of your income, up from that 30%, and then using that to buy or to start organizations to give to their relatives, to give positions to their relatives? I wouldn't want that. So I have no problem with Reagan cutting that tax rate. Now, he didn't just cut tax rate for the rich, as most people say. He did cut them for the poor as well, because the lowest tax band at that time was paying 14%. He moved it to 11%. Now, it's not a major move, right? But it's a move. And remember, you can't really adjust it at that point very much. Yet he actually tried to adjust it even further. Ronald Reagan introduced the earned income tax credit in the United States, and that was specifically for low-income households. And what was the idea? If you earn a very low income, as long as you're working, then you are entitled to tax credits, just to help you survive and without the government taking a lot of your income. So the focus on you had to work. Now, which one would you prefer? Giving cash to people who are not working, or telling people if you work, then you won't pay federal tax. You'll receive a tax credit. Right now, the bottom half of US workers do not pay any federal tax, thanks to Ronald Reagan. That's the bottom half. So how was it trickle-down economics? It wasn't. It was a democratic lie. And Democrats have been lying for a long time. Let me give you an example. William Jennings Bryan, a Democratic presidential candidate in 1896, said, "There are two types of ideas of government. There are those who believe that if you just legislate to make the well-to-do prosperous, that their prosperity will leak through on those below. The democratic idea has been that if you legislate to make the masses prosperous, their prosperity will find its way up and through every class that rests upon it." Can you see the bottom-up approach as articulated by William Jennings Bryan? Imagine a hustler leader saying that, or have they already said it, using different words? Now remember, he was a Democrat arguing against a Republican candidate, vying against a Republican candidate. The name of the Republican candidate was William McKinley. And you see, as he put it, America would fail because McKinley would only focus on the top. He would not focus on the bottom. And that prosperity would not trickle down to the bottom. But what happened under McKinley? Because Bryan lost the election. Now, there is no debate about it. America prospered under McKinley. And it did that in a way that was mostly unbelievable on many different fronts, right? He was able to protect manufacturers and factory workers from foreign competition. Actually, funny thing, William accused Bryan of promoting class warfare, which is what most of the people are accusing the deputy president of. So you see, advocates of bottom-up are usually classified as people promoting some Marxism kind of ideas. Now, what Bryan believed in was that in high tariffs, right, to protect the US manufacturers from foreign competition, which he implemented, and that made the US prosperous because it was able to protect its markets, and then it was able to improve manufacturing within the country. And then he was also focused on imperialism. He did a lot of the Philippines, the Hawaii became a part of America under him, and a number of other territories. He was able to get for Puerto Rico and other territories. So that's what he did. And then he believed in something they call free silver. That means that he wanted the silver to be more and more used as a medium of exchange in America, which was very popular with the farmers in the US, especially in the wheat belt and the cotton belt. So you can see that William was popular amongst farmers. The ODM is trying to push the rural economy. William accused Bryan of class warfare. Bryan was pushing bottom-up economics. ODM is accusing the deputy president of class warfare, and because the deputy president is pushing up bottom-up economics combined with the hustler narrative. So you can see that history repeats itself. We're in different countries, but it's the same kind of argument, and it started from way back, right? Again, you can see that's the Democrats, mostly who are close to socialism, who argue for bottom-up approach. Now, I wanted to give another example, so let's talk about Hoover in 1932. Herbert Clark Hoover became president of the US in March 4, 1929. And by September 1929, the great crash of Wall Street had begun. And from that time, his presidency was defined by the Great Depression. So he wasn't very popular because guys were suffering. And the suffering was worldwide because it was a Great Depression. So people really wanted government to step in and help them because they were suffering. And some of the people included Will Rogers, who in the 1932 elections, he said, Hoover, being an engineer, does not understand trickle-up economics. He does not know that money trickles up, that if he gives money to the bottom, and the top will have it at some point. So Will Rogers was a columnist he did columns, right? And he really did not want this guy to win. He wanted Roosevelt to win. I love Roosevelt. He's a Democrat, but I still love him. He's one of the best presidents the US ever had. And he had polio, which is very sad. But that's the way it is. So you can see again here in 1932, Democrats are accusing Republicans of practicing trickle-down economics. And they're arguing for bottom-up economics. So this one I can't argue much about it because I can't say that it's Hoover's fault, because the great crash of Wall Street had other factors leading to it. At the same time, I love Roosevelt because he was a great wartime president and the world really needed him against Hitler. And he went against all odds, including his personal ailment of polio. So yeah, I can't also say that it's the policies of Roosevelt that resurrected the US economy. Let me say why. Remember, there was the first New Deal of 1933 to 1934, and then there was the second New Deal of 1935 to 1936. Now, if these New Deals were working, if massive government spending in the economy was working, if increasing taxes for the top earners, guys who earn $5 million and above, to 79% in the US was effective, and if that tax increase was in 1935, then why did the US suffer a recession again in 1937? Right? If all this massive spending was okay, then why did the US suffer a recession again? It might show you that government spending wasn't the solution, and it didn't get the US from the depression that it had suffered after the great crash of Wall Street and the depression followed. Perhaps it was something else that saved the US economy, not massive government spending, not demand side economics. Perhaps it was the World War. World War II was close by, and by 1939 it had begun. And from that time to today, the US has been a manufacturing capital for most of the world, and it is still a formidable force today. So perhaps demand side economics did not save the US economy. We have seen that Reagan introduced tax cuts. We have seen that Democrats have vilified Republicans for a long time for top-down approaches, and Democrats have made themselves as the owners of bottom-up approach. We have seen that demand-side economics didn't really help the US recover from the recession in the 1930s. But we haven't talked about the Reagan tax cuts, right? Did those tax cuts help? Remember, he cut taxes from 70% to 50% to 38.5%. And then he cut taxes for the lowest band from 11% to from 14% to 11%. And then he introduced the earned income tax credit, where the very poor wouldn't pay taxes. All they had to do was work. So he encouraged work, but he helped them by ensuring that they got tax credits, right? So what were the results of Reaganomics? This is what happened. Remember, Ronald Reagan was president of the US from 1981 to 1989. Unemployment in the US 1 year after Reagan was president was at 11%. That's in 1982. It declined to 5% in 1988. The rate of inflation declined from 10% in 1980 to 4% in 1988. Real GDP growth averaged 3.5% under Ronald Reagan. Under Obama, it averaged around 1.2%. Remember, Obama pushed demand-side economics. Under Trump, I think it was around 3%. Trump pushed supply-side economics. So we can see supply-side economics the way it works, right? And we also need to remember, at the end of the day, what we want is money in our pockets. And here's the funny thing. If you push supply-side economics, people end up with money in their pockets. If you don't believe me, let's look at the facts. real median family income, right, under Ronald Reagan, it grew from $1,270 to $4,492. That's a big increase. That's more than twice, right? That's actually more than thrice. So that's a big increase. Now that's family income. At the personal level, after declining for most of 1974 to 1980, that's incomes, right? Under Ronald Reagan, real personal income rose $4,708. That's personal income, and that's real personal income. So we can see that after the Great Depression and the use of demand-side economics, there was still a recession in 1937, right? But after the great oil shocks of the 1970s and Reaganomics, supply-side economics, there was an increase in real mean income for the family, for the person. There was a decrease in unemployment rates. There was a decrease in inflation. There was an increase in real GDP growth. So we have facts on these matters. So I don't know why we are always arguing. And this comes to pesa mfukoni. Do you want money in your pocket? If you want money in your pocket, then we have supply-side economics and demand-side economics. We have demand-side where the government throws money at everything, and we have supply-side where the government steps back and lets their entrepreneurs work. And that leads to results, as we have seen. So what is your presidential candidate saying? Is he pushing for demand-side economics, or is he pushing for supply-side economics? Think about it. What is the bottom? Because Democrats have always said that the bottom is the government pushing policies. But when the government pushing policies, isn't it the top that's saying what we should do? Isn't the real bottom up letting the entrepreneurs work, letting them enter the economic cycle of the country, instead of pushing them so many away by high taxes and by high regulation? Let them enter the economy and create solutions for us, not the government. And when they do that, we find that there is money in our pockets, because it's the people who are offering solutions to the people. And the job of the government is to be a referee, and a referee only. So think about what your presidential candidate is saying. Is it the real bottom-up approach? We have seen that to increase disposable income, what we need to do is that we need to reduce taxes. And we really need to make it able for entrepreneurs to use their income to invest and prosper. We also need to reduce government regulations for the same purposes, right? Because with government regulations comes more costs, transactional costs, or just the absolute cost of that regulation, right? Now, also to reduce government spending, we would reduce government borrowing. And if government does not borrow so much from the domestic market, then the lenders would feel more inclined to lend their money to us, the bottom, right? Or close to the bottom. So that's the kind of bottom up that we are talking about. But I also wanted to add a different type of bottom up, and that has to do with technology and knowledge. Different economic models, and I just wanted to mention a few. For example, there we have Roma. He says that there's a technology gap between the rich and the poor nations, and that it can be divided into two components. The first one is a physical object gap, that we don't have enough factories, don't have enough roads, we don't have enough machinery, and so we can't really develop without those things, and we're trying to acquire them, right? And that usually is one of the reasons why we have a lot of imports, right, before we start growing, which would now explain the Rosto growth model to some extent, right? Because there is a bit of import before the takeoff. And then he also has this idea of an idea gap. Now his idea gap is that the knowledge about marketing, about distribution, about control of inventory, about transaction, about worker motivation, just the idea gaps, that we have a deficit of ideas. And that this deficit, that the developed nations today, they didn't have this deficit back in the day. And my question is, why would we have this deficit of knowledge? We have the internet. But are we really promoting knowledge in our society? Are we really, if the endogenous growth model of economics is the way to go, then are we really trying to improve that knowledge within our society so that we can push forth, push further, and push stronger? Are we really trying to do that? Because if we have communication costs that are high, how will we exchange knowledge within our society? If we have internet costs that are high and we've just increased taxes on them, are we really trying to improve knowledge in our society? Are we ready for an information revolution, an information society, a knowledge-based kind of growth? Are we ready for that? If you're doing all of these things. So that's Roma and his endogenous kind of growth model. But we have other different kinds of growth models. For the Harold Doma growth model, right, his focus is on the savings rate. And he says that we need to increase our savings rate so that we can improve the economy. So how can we save when taxes are high or are going higher? And then when government is spending so much that we are competing with it in the money markets, financial markets, how does that work? And then we have the solo model, where the rate of technical progress is the idea that we need to improve our technologies to grow our economy. And if you look at South Korea, if you look at Japan, if you look at the Asian tigers in general, Taiwan and Singapore, they really focus on technology. They really focused on their stock of knowledge as an economy. And even back in the day, to operate in South Korea without an email was a big, it was very hard. To operate there today without a telephone number is very hard, because your telephone number is, from what I hear, kind of like your ID. So they've really advanced in technology. And Japan, we all know that Japan is big on technology. Even Americans were afraid when the Japanese cars came over there, because Japanese were able to focus on technology. They reduced their costs, they reduced their time over period, because now they could produce a lot within a short period. They also produced more efficiently, and it was more cheaply. And Americans couldn't compete with it, and it was more responsive to the American market, leave alone the Japanese market. So in Kenya, are we really doing these things? And if you're doing them, perhaps that's the true bottom up. Helping people acquire knowledge at the bottom, and helping people acquire technologies at the bottom. Perhaps that's the true bottom up. It's not giving people loans. It's not giving people money. It's giving businesses the ability to produce cheaply, to produce quickly, and to produce responsibly. Because if you don't produce things that are responsive, then you end up with assembly lines that are producing goods that we're not buying, because they're either too expensive or that we don't need them. Is there a reason why Japan produced a lot of tuk-tuks first before it produced high-end cars? Is there a reason why we used to import Japanese pencils first before we imported Chinese pencils first before we imported Chinese hardware? Perhaps they started with what was responsive, what the people needed at the bottom level first, and then they were able to shift to others. Perhaps they even came and studied our markets and looked at what we needed on the ground, and they discovered that we needed dual SIM cards. Is the government doing that research on the ground before it spends money? If the Chinese can do research in our country and discover that we need SIM cards that have phones that have dual SIMs, is the government doing research before it gives loans? Is it doing research on how to improve the private insurance sector before it expands NHIF? Or are the deals in NHIF too sweet? So anyway, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, they are homogeneous societies. Like in South Korea, they speak Korean. In Japan, they speak Japanese. Again, there is an incentive to be the best. Because if Japan is not the best, China will take over Japan. Because China still has a lot of issues with Japan and Manchuria. And if Japan sleeps, China might, decide that now we are the top dogs. South Koreans have a lot of issue with Japanese because of the Japanese occupation of the Korea and the atrocities that they committed. So Japan has to be at its best, and South Korea has to be at its best. That nationalism, it has to be at its best. Otherwise, they face a lot of dangers from the other countries. Now, in Africa, we're not homogeneous, and it's not like Uganda is a big threat to us if we don't develop. So we really don't have that incentive to be the best, that incentive to be efficient, that incentive to do what it takes to get where we need to get, so that, for example, Singapore isn't taken over by Malaysia, or that the other countries like Vietnam, China does not take over the South China Seas. We don't have those kinds of threats, so we don't really kind of have that drive to do what is right, because we already know what is right. We already know that we need technology at the bottom level, right? We already know that we need to increase our savings rates. We already know that we need to reduce our taxes. We already know that we need to reduce our government because it's just wasteful. But we're not doing the right things because we're not facing a lot of threats. And that's a big problem, because we're not really taking the true idea of bottom-up. We came up with the idea of bottom-up approach in Kenya. Was it the Hustler Nation? Was it the ODM? Was it the Jubilee? You can see that there's a clip of the president talking about bottom-up approach, where he says that he wants to cushion Kenyans from COVID-19 from the bottom up, not from the top down. So that's the president talking about that. We also have within the ODM manifesto, we also have a lot of policies that the people that the Hustler Nation is talking about. For example, they have this idea that we take the Kenya industrial estates and then we merge it with the youth fund, and then we merge it with the microfinance institutions. We create some kind of synergy between them, and then we advance more loans to the youth. Never mind that the idea of loans has never worked in Kenya since it was introduced, because the youth fund has been useless, and that the Uwezo fund, the president injected around 6 billion into it at the constituency level, but it hasn't worked, right? And now the Hustler Nation is talking about loans. So you can see this idea of loans to the youth, throwing government at it, has always been there. It's nothing new. Let's talk about infrastructure. Infrastructure is very important because we're talking about social overhead capital, which is one of the primary ingredients for a takeoff. The other ones was agricultural productivity, which includes technological advancements. And the other one was trade, improved trade, which starts with the increased imports and then continues with the exports. So that's the restore model of economic growth, and that's the pre-takeoff stage, what we need to take off, right? So social overheads are very important. And the problem with government is that it's focusing on infrastructure alone, roads, bridges. Why is it focusing on that? Because that's where the money is. That's where they can eat as much as possible. For a road for 3 million, they can take 9 million, right? So that's why there's a really focus on it, and that's why it's not responsive to the people, because it's about tenders. It's not about you or me. So yeah, there's a focus of infrastructure when they're talking about bottom up. They say that the real bottom up is taking infrastructure to the bottom, but the problem is we're not the ones telling them that we need that road there and not there. They're the ones who like, look at the coast. When the president built that bridge at the coast to prevent the ferry accidents, he built a floating bridge away from where the people wanted it. So the people are still using the ferry because he was not being responsive to the people. So now the government has to force the people to use that one, which is very inconvenient for them. So yes, we have built infrastructure, but the people do not want it. It's inconvenient, and it does not answer their needs, right? So they'd rather risk than do that. So we waste a lot of money doing that. So there's a big focus on the rural economy, where everybody is talking about the rural economy. Like DP was saying that he wants to focus on farmer groups, right? ODM, I think it was Gladys Wanga who was saying the real bottom up is focusing on the real on the rural economy. So you see, their policies are kind of like the same. There's no difference in their policies, right? So there's no, in my opinion, there's no real bottom up. It's a democratic kind of bottom up, which is always false. The real bottom up is letting the entrepreneurs do their thing. Now, if you look at the UDA constitution, it talks about shared prosperity. There's a Wiper senator, I think, who was talking about shared prosperity. And then there was the BBI, which had shared prosperity, and we were shouting about that. That shared prosperity was not original even to Kenya. It was according to China. They talk about shared prosperity. Now, the problem with Kenyans is that they take from China without understanding what is happening in China. Because China is not just socialism. They say it's socialism with Chinese characteristics. So we need to understand what those characteristics are. And what are they? They are capitalistic tendencies. So you are borrowing the socialists from China, the socialist policies, but you're forgetting about their characteristics that they're employing, those capitalistic tendencies. So if we import those capitalistic tendencies and leave them with their socialist tendencies, we might do even better. So everybody is talking about shared prosperity. There's no originality in it. Kazi ni kazi, that's the UDA manifesto. ODM also talks about supporting individual enterprise as part of the ideology, right? So there's no originality in these ideas. Now, and they don't really originate from the hustler nation. They mostly originate from China. Now, differences with Kibaki. Kibaki went on a privatization overdrive. He privatized a lot of farms, and he did that saving us a lot of burden, because we wouldn't have to pump money into Kenya Meat Commission if it was privatized, right? And he saved us a lot of cost because he understood that we need a lean government. Kibaki did a lot of research. By the time Kibaki was president, Kipra was a big deal. It was bigger than the Institute of Economic Affairs. These days you can't even hear Kipra, right? And before you do a project, Kipra had to examine it and see that it's okay. Not all of Kibaki's projects were successful, honestly, but many of them were, because they were research based. And research is when you go to the ground and understand what is happening there. And if China can come to us and understand what we need in our phones, why can't we do the same? Why are we building bridges far away from where the people want those bridges? So now they have to feel that they have to use this one. Reduction of taxes. When Kibaki came into office, one of the first things he did, he reduced VAT from 18% to 16%. Was he a fool to do so? He understood economics, and he understood supply side economics. Our people do not. They just want, because that's where the money is. When government spends, that's where the money is. And those are the very dangers that we have in what these guys are saying. Because none of them is talking about tax reductions. The Hustler Nation is not talking about it. If you look at DP's tweets, you wouldn't see a tweet where he commits to reducing taxes. The ODM manifesto, if you read it, it's not talking about tax reduction. None of them is talking about limiting government. In fact, what they're talking about is increasing government, which is very, very bad. And it's not something that we need to do or we should do. Another thing is that they're talking about, like the DP in one of his latest tweets, he was talking about labor intensive projects. BBI manifesto, one of the first drafts, because they had like 1 million drafts, they were talking about labor intensive projects. Edwin Sifuna just the other day, he talked about kazi mashambani. Jubilee government already has kazi mtaani. So what these guys are talking about are pre-industrialization phases. Because before the industrialization in Britain, centuries ago, that's what they had, labor intensive projects. And now that's what we are pushing today. Whereas Korea South Korea, whereas Japan, whereas Singapore, they focus on technology. And I've mentioned the growth models, like the solo growth model. The rate of technical growth is very, very important. And we're still talking about labor-intensive projects. What is wrong with us? When you look at the Roma economic growth model, he talks a lot about knowledge. That knowledge should help us not to use our labor too much. It should help us to increase savings, and then we have a higher savings rate, like the Harold Doma model. So anyway, these guys are talking about labor intensive projects. All of them, both sides, they're talking about additional spending. Everybody's talking about additional spending. Throw money at it, especially infrastructure, because that's where they'll eat. And then if you listen to Didi Nyoro talking, he's talking about the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality. So what they want to do, they want to reduce the inequality gap, right? But do you really want to do that? Do you want the government to determine how close together we should be in income? Or should we let our hard work determine that? The role of government should be making it fair, such that if I want to work, then it should not impede me from working, or somebody else should not impede me from working. Let his ideas carry the day. Let my ideas carry the day. Whoever's ideas are the best, let him make the most income. But when government decides that, oh, you've made too much, we need to reduce it, is that fair? Does that encourage somebody to work? Again, how do we generate ideas? How do we generate knowledge in this society? How do we encourage guys to innovate and come up with technology when we are going to limit them? Once they start profiting from it, we're saying, oh, that's too much profit. All we have to do is to make things fair. And we can do that by making it possible for guys to the entry into the market to be easier than it is right now, because it's very hard. So that's income inequality. We need to stop thinking about creating a utopia. It will never come into place. And every country that has created a utopia has failed. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics failed, and in 1990 it had to resort to communism. The 5-year plans under Mao failed. 20 million people were dead. And then they realized that they need characteristics. Socialism with characteristics, right? Look at North Korea today. How is it? It's not doing good. Look at South Korea. How is it? It's doing great. So we really need to think about these utopias. They don't work. A couple of people saying a couple of things about the bottom-up approach. I've said mine. I hope you've listened. So let me talk about what other people have been saying. I won't mention names. So some people say that devolution is the same as bottom-up, which is not true. What happens is that like in the Bolshevik society, they used to decentralize those oppressive systems, or they would decentralize corruption, right? So it's the same as devolution. Devolution can be the same top-down, just moving along a decentralized line. It's solutions from the top. You have determined that what we need is loans. So throw loans at them. You have determined that what we need is a livestock slaughterhouse. So you throw KMTC at us. You have determined that what we need for insurance cover is government insurance. So you throw NHIF at us. And you tell us, take it up. We have helped you. So that can be trickled down to the bottom. Again, let's look at in terms of taxes, right? You have kept taxes high as national government. Now they're even higher as county government. So is that really bottom up? Regulations were high as under national government. They are now even higher under county government. So we've just worsened the situation. We've worsened the top-down approach. And that's not the way we wanted to go. Bureaucracy has increased, the role of technocrats has increased, and the top elites, they control devolved resources. So that's not bottom-up. Bottom-up means that what we want, the solutions come from us. and we try to organize those solutions through enterprises, right? And if not so, we try to organize them through policies that we advocate, the roads that we want, the bridges that we want, right? Not what you want. So devolution is not the same as bottom up. Should politics comes first and then we change our economic system? Economics defines the politics. We fight because we lack resources. We fight because there is a scarcity of resources. We fight because we are trying to determine how we shall distribute these resources. So economics comes first. So we have to change the model first before economics changes. I love something that Gathoni wa Muchomba said some time back. She said, there are some areas in Kenya where you don't go with your chest, thumping your chest, bumping your chest. You don't go with a lot of pride. You don't go telling people what to do. You come with humility. And she was saying about Central Province, she said that the people of Mount Kenya, they have their own money. So you have to come with a bit of humility because they don't need your policies and they can do without them. So I'm not sure if that's true because there's a lot of poverty in Central Kenya and a lot of suicide rates there. So but given her, let's assume that it is true. Then it would mean that when people have money in their pockets, they ascribe to a different kind of politics. They can even throw away their tribal kingpin. Reject is the right word. Reject their tribal kingpin. So that would mean that to change the economic welfare of the people might make them reject tribal politics. So the economics comes first, not the politics. So other people say that we should deal with corruption first and then economics. Now again, I think I've shown that under socialism we have demand side economics, and under demand side economics we throw money at everything. And that is what encourages corruption. That is corruption at its very core, because people have money to spend, and that money comes from the bottom where everybody believes it's our money. So when you eat it, you have eaten our money. So they don't really care about it. So if you want to end corruption, you'd have to change the economic model first. Ensure that there's little money to steal, and such that what you have must be used properly. Because imagine you're in a family and you guys have a lot of money. When you have little money, you're going to spend it on food, you're going to spend it on electricity, you're going to spend it on shelter. You're not going to spend on these other things. And if somebody does that, then they'll make the entire family angry. And that's the same with government. When government has little to spend, it has to spend it wisely. It has to spend it well on security. It has to spend it well on social overheads, the overheads that matter. But if we give government an infinite amount of money, if we let it borrow infinitely, then government would spend it on anything that it wants. Somebody wants a tender, he says we need this, and then after some time we don't need it. So that's the problem with you have to change the economic model, because when you throw money at things, that's when corruption comes into play. But when you reduce the taxes, when you reduce government, then there's little money to eat, and whatever that's there has to be used efficiently. So that's the idea. So on my last point, the point is about the ownership of the bottom-up approach. We have seen that there is no real difference between what ODM advocates, especially in its manifesto, and what the Hustler Nation advocates. There is no really big difference. Just to recap, there is shared prosperity in the UDA constitution, there's shared prosperity in BBI, in which these guys were advocating. So there's no real difference between these guys. So I would want ODM to take ownership of the bottom-up approach. One, because it cannot fight it, because it's a catchy phrase. When somebody says that he'll come for me at the bottom and he'll listen to me and he'll give me resources here at the bottom, I'll listen to that person. And when somebody says that that person is lying to me, I tell him, okay, give me the resources. Give me the resources. And if he's already given wheelbarrows and all of those things from his own pocket, and there's already a model like Uwezo where people are getting money at the grassroots, then I'm likely to believe that he'll just expand what is already there, or he'll just move it from private funds for his wheelbarrows to government funds, and he'll move Uwezo from the cash from around 18 million that it was to around 100 million, and we already had CDF as proof. So fighting the bottom-up approach is very hard, right? I do not like it, but it is what it is. What we need to do is we need to move into arguments over what is good versus what is bad. What is the true bottom-up? Because like Gladys Wanga was saying, the true bottom-up is rural economy. The Hustler Nation is now talking about the rural economy. Like the DP has focused on it several times now. And that was a response to what ODM was pushing, the rural economy. So you can see that when there's a push and pull between these guys, they start refining their ideas. And this continuous refinement has to go on until 2022 comes into play. Now, and then they start moving into the specifics, because for some time the Hustler Nation was not specific on what it wants to do for the bottom-up approach. You can see now that they are starting to become specific. They're mentioning actual policies that they want. They're mentioning actual groups. And this is what we need. We need specifics. And when we get specifics, people like me will analyze those specifics, and then we'll share with each other on which specifics are okay, which specifics are bad. And then we can make an informed decision come 2022. I just wanted to make one point. Here's a classic example of bottom-up that I wanted to show you. This is the bottom-up where we bring government resources to the bottom, right? For example, we can have a government person who develops a government body, and that government body analyzes economic policies, and it holds seminars to decide which are the best economic policies, and then they come to they hire their relatives or somebody else or their friends who comes and speaks to us about economic policies at the grassroots level, and then they'll only capture a few people at the market, right? So that's, you can see it's bottom down because they're coming to the bottom down at the people. Or we can have entrepreneurs who bring technologies like Twitter, and then I can do a video, and then you can do a video, and then we can discuss economic policies here cheaply, without having to hire government bodies, without having to hire the relatives of government friends using our taxes. So this is the real bottom up, where entrepreneurs provide the solutions in our society. Where, like for example, the regulations on Twitter in Kenya are very low, and that is why it has been able to achieve so much. If we help people enter into the market more easily, then we'll find solutions. If we allow people to keep more of their income and use them for research and development and improving their products, then we'll find solutions. If government acts as a referee to fight the people who are trying to exploit us, then we will find solutions. And that's the way it's supposed to go. The other point that I have is that we need to improve the power of recall in Kenya. It's very poor. So that's all I had. Remember, subscribe, like, hit the notification button, and share with your friends. Bye bye. God bless.